The email arrived at 6:47 p.m. with the subject line that made my blood run cold. Termination of employment effective immediately. 22 years of building the company's most profitable department gone in 3 paragraphs. But it was the final line that cut deepest. Finally, I can replace you with someone who actually deserves this position. Victoria Chen, my newly promoted boss, had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She had no idea what she'd just triggered. By the next morning, she'd be sitting in HR, hands shaking as they delivered news that would haunt her for years. Do you realize we owe her $1.4 million in severance? The department budget? $800,000 for the entire year. Victoria had just bankrupted her own operation in a single vindictive email. Sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones where your enemies destroy themselves, and Victoria was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. We're incredibly close to reaching 1,000 subscribers who believe that workplace justice stories like these matter. If you want to see more incredible comebacks where karma delivers the perfect lesson at exactly the right moment, help us hit that milestone by subscribing. These real stories of workplace drama and unexpected victories happen more often than you'd think, and they're always worth sharing. My name is Rebecca Williams, and for over 2 decades, I served as Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations at Whitmore & Associates, one of the largest consulting firms on the East Coast. My journey to the executive suite wasn't paved with family connections or inherited wealth. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where my father worked double shifts at the local manufacturing plant, and my mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Those early years taught me something invaluable: how to recognize the struggles behind every face, how to listen when others spoke, and how to lift people up rather than tear them down. It was this foundation of empathy and genuine care for others that would ultimately become both my greatest strength and, as it seemed that Tuesday evening, my supposed downfall. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stared at that email. Victoria Chen had been gunning for my position since the day she transferred from our Seattle branch 3 years ago. Fresh out of an MBA program at an elite business school, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about whether the lights would stay on at home. Where I built bridges, she constructed walls. Where I mentored junior staff, she hoarded information like precious currency. Our CEO, Jonathan Whitmore III, had announced his retirement 6 months earlier. The succession plan had been the topic of countless boardroom discussions, and everyone assumed the transition would be smooth. What nobody anticipated was Jonathan's final decision to restructure the entire leadership hierarchy before his departure. In his farewell announcement, he revealed that Victoria would assume control of our strategic operations department, along with its newly allocated $30 million annual budget, the largest departmental fund in company history. I had spent 22 years building that department from a modest team of 5 consultants into a powerhouse of over 200 professionals spanning 4 major cities. We handled the firm's most prestigious clients, generated nearly 60% of total company revenue, and maintained a client retention rate of 97%. Under my leadership, we had weathered 3 major economic downturns and emerged stronger each time. The morning of Victoria's promotion, I congratulated her genuinely. Despite our professional differences, I believed in maintaining dignity and professionalism. I even offered to help with the transition, sharing insights about key clients and operational strategies that had taken years to develop. Her response was a tight smile and a comment about finally bringing some fresh perspective to outdated methods. That afternoon, I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when Victoria knocked on my door. She entered without waiting for permission, her expression a mixture of smugness and barely contained excitement. "Rebecca, we need to discuss your future with this company," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk as if she already owned the space. "I'm implementing significant changes to align our department with modern industry standards. These changes require leadership that's more adaptable to contemporary business practices." I had been expecting this conversation. Victoria had made no secret of her belief that my management style was too collaborative, too focused on employee development, and not aggressive enough for today's competitive market. She favored a more hierarchical approach, where decisions flowed from the top down without input from subordinates. "I'm certainly open to discussing operational improvements," I replied carefully. "This department's success has always been built on our ability to evolve while maintaining our core values of client service and team development." Victoria's smile sharpened. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that needs to change. I've already identified several areas where we can significantly increase profit margins by streamlining operations. However, these improvements require a complete overhaul of current practices and, frankly, current personnel." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria outlining her vision for a more efficient department structure. Efficiency, in her vocabulary, seemed to translate to reduced staff benefits, longer working hours, elimination of professional development programs, and a performance evaluation system based solely on billable hours rather than client satisfaction or collaborative achievements. As she spoke, I realized this wasn't really a discussion about operational changes. This was Victoria's way of pushing me toward resignation. She wanted me to leave voluntarily, probably to avoid the complications that would arise from terminating a senior executive with my tenure and track record. "I appreciate your vision, Victoria," I said when she finished her presentation. "However, I believe there's tremendous value in maintaining the collaborative culture that has made this department so successful. Perhaps we could explore ways to implement your ideas while preserving the elements that our clients and staff value most highly." Her expression hardened. "I wasn't asking for your input on my strategic decisions, Rebecca. I was informing you of changes that are going to happen regardless of your personal opinions. The question is whether you'll be part of the solution or continue to represent the problem." The meeting ended with Victoria stating that she would be evaluating all current personnel for alignment with new departmental objectives over the next few weeks. The message was clear: adapt to her methods completely or find yourself looking for new employment. Over the following days, I watched Victoria implement changes with ruthless efficiency. She canceled long-standing client meetings to review cost effectiveness, eliminated the monthly team-building sessions that had fostered our collaborative culture, and began conducting individual meetings with each department member. These weren't performance reviews, they were interrogations designed to identify who would support her new regime and who might pose resistance. Several junior associates approached me privately, expressing concerns about the dramatic shift in department culture. Many were considering leaving the company entirely rather than work under Victoria's micromanagement style. I found myself in the difficult position of trying to maintain morale while respecting the chain of command. The tension reached a breaking point during a department meeting where Victoria announced the elimination of our mentorship program, an initiative I had developed that paired senior consultants with newer staff members. The program had been instrumental in reducing turnover and developing the next generation of company leaders. "Mentorship is an inefficient use of billable hours," Victoria declared. "Our consultants need to focus on generating revenue, not hand-holding junior staff who should be capable of learning through independent study and observation." The room fell silent. I could see the disappointment on faces throughout the conference room, particularly among the younger staff members who had tremendously benefited from the guidance and support of experienced mentors.
"Victoria, might I suggest a compromise?" I ventured. "The mentorship program has contributed significantly to our low turnover rate, which ultimately saves the company money on recruitment and training costs. Perhaps we could restructure it to be more time efficient while maintaining its core benefits." Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation. "Rebecca, your constant pushback against necessary improvements is becoming counterproductive. I'm beginning to question whether your management philosophy aligns with this company's future direction." The room grew even more uncomfortable. Several staff members shifted nervously in their seats, clearly aware they were witnessing a power struggle that could have significant implications for everyone present. "I'm simply trying to preserve the elements that have made this department successful," I replied calmly. "Our client satisfaction scores and retention rates speak for themselves." "Past performance doesn't guarantee future success," Victoria snapped. "We need leaders who can adapt to changing market conditions, not ones who cling to outdated practices because they're comfortable." The meeting ended abruptly with Victoria dismissing everyone except her newly appointed assistant, Tyler Morrison, a recent hire who had quickly positioned himself as her loyal supporter. As staff members filed out, I noticed the concerned glances and whispered conversations that indicated the department's morale was reaching a critical low point. That evening, I stayed late to review personnel files and client contracts, trying to understand how Victoria planned to implement her changes without damaging client relationships or violating employment agreements. What I discovered in the company's legal database would prove to be crucial information, though I didn't realize its significance at the time. Buried in the standard employment contracts that every Whitmore and Associates executive signed was a clause I had honestly forgotten about, a provision that had been added during a company restructuring 15 years earlier. The clause outlined severance requirements for executives terminated without cause, and the terms were far more generous than I remembered. For someone with my tenure and position, the severance package would be substantial. The following Tuesday brought Victoria's email termination. Reading those words, "Finally, I can replace you," I felt a mixture of hurt, anger, and, oddly, relief. After weeks of tension and barely concealed hostility, the uncertainty was over. Victoria had made her move, and now I could move forward with dignity intact. I spent that evening calling several close colleagues to inform them personally before they heard through office gossip. The conversations were emotional. Many expressed outrage at Victoria's handling of the situation and concern about the department's future direction. Several mentioned they were already considering leaving the company themselves. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office early to pack my belongings. 22 years of career memories filled several boxes, awards from satisfied clients, photos from team celebrations, thank you notes from mentees who had advanced to leadership positions throughout the industry. Each item represented relationships built and maintained through genuine care and professional excellence. As I was removing personal items from my desk, Tyler Morrison appeared in my doorway with what I could only describe as gleeful satisfaction. "Victoria wants you gone by 10 a.m., he announced. "Security will escort you out if you're not finished by then." I looked at my watch. 9:15. "I'll be ready," I replied calmly, refusing to give him the reaction he was clearly hoping for. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked through the office lobby for what I assumed would be the last time, carrying a small box of personal items and my head held high. Several colleagues stood near the elevators, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and outrage. I hugged each of them goodbye and promised to stay in touch. What I didn't know was that at that precise moment, Victoria was in a meeting with Human Resources Director Amanda Foster, discussing budget allocations for the upcoming quarter. Amanda had requested the meeting to review employment-related expenses and ensure all personnel changes were properly documented for legal and financial compliance. "I need to verify the financial impact of Rebecca Williams' termination," Amanda had told Victoria as they sat in the HR conference room, surrounded by employee files and legal documents. "Whenever we terminate a senior executive, there are significant costs beyond just removing them from payroll." Victoria waved dismissively.
She's gone, that's what matters. Whatever the costs are, they're worth it to move this department forward. Amanda frowned as she pulled up my employment contract on her computer screen. Victoria, I need you to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Rebecca's contract includes a comprehensive severance package that was negotiated during the 2009 restructuring. How comprehensive? Victoria asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly concerned about the details. Amanda's expression grew increasingly worried as she reviewed the contract terms. Given her position level, length of service, and the circumstances of her termination, we're looking at immediate full salary continuation for 18 months, accelerated vesting of all retirement contributions, continuation of health benefits for her entire family for 2 years, and a lump sum payment equal to 6 months of her current salary. Victoria's confident expression began to fade. What does that mean in actual dollar amounts? Amanda's fingers flew over her calculator as she computed the various components. Rebecca's current annual salary is $375,000, so 18 months of salary continuation is $562,500. The accelerated retirement vesting adds another $230,000. Health benefits for her family will cost approximately $48,000 over 2 years. The lump sum payment is $187,500. The color was draining from Victoria's face as Amanda continued her calculations. There are also additional considerations. She's entitled to her full annual bonus for this year since she was terminated after completing 80% of the performance period. Based on department revenue figures, that bonus will be approximately $150,000. That's already over $1 million, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. Amanda nodded grimly. But there's more. The contract also includes what's called a non-compete consideration fee if we enforce the non-compete clause. Given her level of client relationships and industry knowledge, we'll definitely want to enforce it. That fee is equal to 12 months of her current salary, another $375,000. Victoria sat in stunned silence as Amanda delivered the final blow. The total severance obligation is approximately $1,422,500. That's before we factor in legal fees, potential wrongful termination exposure, and the cost of hiring and training her replacement. That's impossible, Victoria stammered. No one authorized that kind of expense. The department budget can't absorb that hit. Amanda's expression grew even more grave. Victoria, there's another issue we need to address. Rebecca's contract specifies that severance payments for executives at her level must be made within 30 days of termination. We don't have the option to spread these costs over multiple fiscal periods. Victoria's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. I need to call Jonathan. He must not have understood the financial implications when he approved my decision to terminate her. Actually, Amanda said quietly, I have documentation showing that you never received formal approval for this termination. Jonathan's transition memo specifically stated that any personnel changes involving senior executives required board approval and HR consultation before implementation. The room fell silent except for the sound of Victoria's labored breathing. Amanda could see panic setting in as the full scope of the situation became clear. You're telling me, said Victoria slowly, that I terminated a senior executive without proper authorization, and now the company owes her nearly $1.5 million in severance? That's correct. And, Victoria, there's one more thing you need to know. Given the circumstances of her termination, particularly the email you sent, our legal counsel is concerned about potential wrongful termination claims. Rebecca's employment record is exemplary, and the timing of her dismissal immediately after you assumed department leadership could be construed as retaliatory. Victoria stood abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup and sending dark liquid spreading across the conference table. This can't be happening. The department budget for executive compensation is only $800,000 for the entire year. Where is this money supposed to come from? Amanda began collecting papers from the spreading coffee spill. That's a question for the finance department and ultimately the board of directors. But Victoria, you need to understand that these aren't optional payments. Rebecca's contract was negotiated and signed by the company. We're legally obligated to honor these terms. The phone call that would change everything came at exactly 11:30 a.m. I was at home, still processing the events of the morning and beginning to consider my next career steps, when my phone rang with a call from Amanda Foster. "Rebecca, I hope I'm not disturbing you." Amanda's voice sounded strained and exhausted. "I need to ask you some questions about your employment contract and severance entitlements." "Of course," I replied, though I was curious about the urgency in her voice. "I assume you're calling to discuss the logistics of my departure." "Actually, the situation has become quite complicated. I've been reviewing your contract with Victoria, and we've discovered some significant financial implications that weren't fully considered before your termination was implemented." I could hear papers rustling in the background and what sounded like muffled voices having an urgent conversation. "Amanda, is everything all right?" "Rebecca, I need to be direct with you. Your severance package, according to the terms negotiated in your executive contract, amounts to approximately $1.4 million. This includes salary continuation, benefit maintenance, retirement acceleration, bonus obligations, and non-compete considerations." The number was staggering, far beyond anything I had calculated when I briefly reviewed my contract the night before. I wasn't aware the total would be quite that substantial. "Neither was Victoria," Amanda said with a bitter laugh. "She's currently in Jonathan's office. He came in specifically to address this situation, and the conversation isn't going well. The department's executive compensation budget can't absorb this expense, and the company's cash flow projections for this quarter don't account for such a large unplanned expenditure." As Amanda explained the various components of my severance package, I began to understand why Victoria's confidence had apparently evaporated so quickly. The very aggressive termination strategy she had employed to remove me had triggered the most expensive possible exit scenario. "Amanda," I said carefully, "I need you to know that I never intended to create financial difficulties for the company. If there are ways to structure the payments or adjust the terms to be more manageable, I'm willing to discuss alternatives." "That's generous of you, Rebecca, but the legal department has made it clear that we can't modify these terms unilaterally. The contract was negotiated in good faith, and any changes would require mutual agreement and extensive legal review." That afternoon, I received a call I never expected. Victoria herself was on the line, and her voice bore no resemblance to the confident, dismissive tone she had used just 24 hours earlier. "Rebecca, I need to speak with you about the current situation," she began, her words careful and measured. "There have been some complications regarding your departure that need immediate attention." "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my tone neutral and professional. "It seems the severance calculations were more complex than initially anticipated. The financial impact is significant. I wanted to discuss whether there might be alternatives that could work for everyone involved." I could hear the desperation beneath her careful words. The woman who had triumphantly declared she could finally replace me was now calling to negotiate because the replacement had become financially impossible. "What kind of alternatives are you considering?" I asked. Victoria was quiet for several seconds before responding. "We would be interested in exploring whether you might consider returning to your previous position. Obviously, there would need to be discussions about restructuring some of the recent changes to better accommodate different management styles." The irony was almost overwhelming. Less than 36 hours after being told I was outdated and replaceable, I was being asked to return because the replacement couldn't afford to replace me. "Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I think we both know that would be extremely difficult given what's transpired. The trust and working relationship that would be necessary for success has been significantly damaged." "I understand your concerns," she replied quickly, But Rebecca, you need to understand the position this puts the entire company in. The severance obligation affects not just our department, but the overall corporate financial stability. There are hundreds of employees whose jobs could be impacted if we can't resolve this situation. Her attempt to frame this as my responsibility for other people's welfare was both manipulative and revealing. The same person who had shown no concern for employee morale or job satisfaction when implementing her streamlined efficiency measures was now invoking concern for employee welfare when her own position was threatened. Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I think we both know that would be extremely difficult given what's transpired. The trust and working relationship that would be necessary for success has been significantly damaged. I understand your concerns, she replied quickly. But Rebecca, you need to understand the position this puts the entire company in. The severance obligation affects not just our department, but the overall corporate financial stability. There are hundreds of employees whose jobs could be impacted if we can't resolve this situation. Her attempt to frame this as my responsibility for other people's welfare was both manipulative and revealing. The same person who had shown no concern for employee morale or job satisfaction when implementing her streamlined efficiency measures was now invoking concern for employee welfare when her own position was threatened. Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I think we both know that would be extremely difficult given what's transpired. The trust and working relationship that would be necessary for success has been significantly damaged. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria becoming increasingly desperate in her attempts to find a solution that would eliminate the massive severance obligation while allowing her to maintain her leadership position. She offered various compromises, part-time consulting arrangements, extended transition periods, even a co-leadership structure where we would share departmental responsibilities. Each proposal revealed how completely she had underestimated both the financial implications of her actions and the operational complexities of the department she had been so eager to modernize. The collaborative culture and relationship-based approach she had dismissed as outdated were exactly what would be needed to clean up the mess she had created. Rebecca, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, I may have acted hastily in restructuring your role. Perhaps there's a way to frame this as a temporary leave while we work out a long-term arrangement that benefits everyone. I had to admire her creativity, if not her ethics. She was essentially asking me to pretend that the termination hadn't happened so the company could avoid paying the severance while she maintained her position and authority. Victoria, I think we need to be realistic about what's happened here. You made a decision based on your assessment of what was best for the department and the company. Now you're dealing with the consequences of that decision. Asking me to help you avoid those consequences isn't really fair or appropriate. But the money, Rebecca, the company genuinely can't afford to pay out $1.4 million right now. There are cash flow issues, budget constraints, and board expectations that make this payment extremely problematic. Then perhaps, I said calmly, the company should have considered those factors before terminating a senior executive without proper authorization or consultation. The line was quiet for nearly a full minute before Victoria spoke again. What would it take for you to consider coming back? The question hung in the air between us. What would it take? Trust that had been broken by her dismissive treatment of employees and clients? Respect that had been demolished by her public humiliation of my career and contributions? Confidence that she had learned from this expensive lesson about the importance of collaboration and careful decision-making? Victoria, even if I were interested in returning, which I'm not sure I am, there would need to be fundamental changes to your leadership approach. The management style that led to this situation would have to be completely abandoned. By late afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond Victoria's ability to manage. Jonathan Whitmore had returned to the office and called an emergency meeting with the board of directors to discuss the personnel crisis that threatened to destabilize the company's financial position for the remainder of the fiscal year. Amanda called me again to provide an update on the rapidly evolving situation. Rebecca, I want you to know that the board is meeting tonight to determine how to proceed. There are serious questions being raised about Victoria's judgment and decision-making process. I imagine there would be, I replied. This is exactly the kind of situation that proper consultation procedures are designed to prevent. The board is also concerned about the broader implications. If we're obligated to pay your severance, and if Victoria's management changes result in significant staff turnover, we could be looking at recruitment and training costs that compound the financial impact substantially. Amanda was right to be concerned. Several of my former colleagues had already called to tell me they were updating their resumes and considering offers from competitors. The collaborative culture that had made the department successful was disintegrating rapidly under Victoria's authoritarian approach. There's something else, Amanda continued. 3 major clients have already contacted Jonathan directly to express concerns about the changes they're seeing. The Hartwell Group specifically mentioned that they chose our firm because of the collaborative approach and relationship focus that you championed. They're questioning whether we're still the right fit for their needs. This was the domino effect I had feared. Victoria's focus on short-term efficiency improvements had failed to account for the long-term relationship building that sustained major client accounts. The very qualities she had dismissed as outdated were what distinguished our firm from competitors who competed solely on price. Amanda, I want to be clear about something. While I understand the financial pressure the company is facing, I also can't ignore what's happened here. Even if the severance issue could be resolved, the fundamental problems with Victoria's leadership approach would still need to be addressed. I think the board is beginning to understand that, Amanda replied. The question is whether it's possible to repair the damage that's been done to both internal culture and client relationships. That evening, while I was having dinner with my family and reflecting on the surreal events of the past 2 days, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Jonathan Whitmore's personal number. Rebecca, I owe you an apology, he began without preamble. I should have been more involved in the transition process, and I should have required formal board approval before any senior personnel changes were implemented. Thank you for saying that, Jonathan. I appreciate the acknowledgement. I'm calling because the board has asked me to explore options for resolving this situation in a way that serves the best interests of both you and the company. We're dealing with multiple interconnected problems that Victoria's decisions have created. Jonathan went on to explain that the board's emergency meeting had revealed the full scope of the crisis. The severance obligation was only the beginning. 3 major clients representing over $12 million in annual revenue were threatening to terminate their contracts. 7 key employees had submitted resignation letters in the past 24 hours. The department's projected revenue for the quarter had dropped by nearly 30% as pending proposals were withdrawn by prospects who had heard about the internal turmoil. Victoria's approach may have been well-intentioned, Jonathan continued diplomatically, but the execution has been catastrophic for both morale and business continuity. The board has lost confidence in her ability to lead the department effectively. What are you proposing? I asked, though I suspected I knew where the conversation was heading. We'd like you to consider returning as department head, with Victoria transitioning to a different role within the company. Obviously, this would involve significant changes to how the recent restructuring has been implemented. I could hear the desperation in his voice. The same leadership team that had endorsed Victoria's promotion and given her a $30 million budget was now asking me to clean up the mess she had created in less than a week. Jonathan, you need to understand that this isn't just about my personal feelings or career aspirations. The department's culture has been damaged, employee trust has been broken, and client relationships have been strained. Reversing Victoria's decisions won't automatically fix those problems. We understand that recovery will take time and effort. But Rebecca, you built this department once. The board believes that if anyone can rebuild it, you can. The offer Jonathan presented was comprehensive. Full restoration of my previous position and authority, a substantial salary increase to reflect the additional responsibilities of repair and reconstruction, complete autonomy over hiring and management decisions, and a commitment from the board to support long-term relationship-building strategies rather than short-term efficiency measures. But what struck me most was what he said next. Rebecca, Victoria has agreed to a voluntary transition to our corporate development division. She recognizes that her management style may be better suited to project-based work rather than team leadership. In other words, Victoria had been demoted after less than a week in her dream position. The woman who had spent 3 years undermining my leadership and questioning my methods had managed to destroy her own career faster than anyone could have imagined. I agreed to return, but not just because of the financial offer or the vindication. The department I had built represented more than just my career. It was a community of professionals who deserved leadership that valued both their contributions and their growth. The clients we served deserved consistency and relationship-based service. The younger employees deserved mentorship and development opportunities. My first day back was emotional. The staff welcomed me with genuine enthusiasm, and several clients called personally to express their relief. Victoria and I had a brief, professional conversation during which she acknowledged that her approach had been more disruptive than anticipated. She maintained her dignity throughout the transition, and I respected that. The department's recovery took several months, but it was ultimately successful. We not only retained the clients who had been considering leaving, but attracted new accounts drawn by our reputation for stability and relationship focus. Staff turnover returned to its previous low levels, and the collaborative culture was gradually restored. As for Victoria, she found success in corporate development, where her analytical skills and detail-oriented approach proved valuable for project-based work. We developed a professional working relationship based on mutual respect for each other's different strengths and approaches. The experience taught me that true leadership isn't about having all the authority or making all the decisions. It's about building something sustainable that can weather challenges and changes. Sometimes the most expensive lesson is also the most valuable one, and in this case, that lesson cost exactly $1.4 million that was never paid, because sometimes the best solution is simply to undo the mistake and start over with wisdom gained.